Welcome to Skylight Books. We're really excited to be here tonight with Stan Mack to celebrate real life puppies. 20 years, did you say?
Exactly.
My name is Hallie. I'm a bookseller here. I'll be your host tonight. If you haven't yet, please turn off your cell phone. Buy the book if you also haven't done that yet. We will have a signing after the discussion and Q&A, so you want to get that signed. Yeah, I think that's it. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce first Stan Mack. Stan pioneered a documentary style of cartooning with his legendary New York comic strip, Stan Mack's Real Life Funnies, which featured real New Yorkers in their own words. The strip ran in the Village Voice for 20 years. A giant collection of those strips, Stan Mack's Real Life Funnies, that collected conceits, delusions, and hijinks of New Yorkers from 1974 to 1995, offers a visual time capsule of two of the most colorful, gritty, and outrageous decades in New York City's history. Mack's other long-running comic strip includes Mule's Diner for National Lampoon, Stan Mack's Outtakes, and Stan Mack's Real Mad. He is a graduate of the Rhode Island School of Design and a former art director of the New York Herald Tribune's Book Week, the New York Times Book Review, and New York Times Sunday Magazine. He's joined tonight by Michael Dooley. Michael is a designer, author, editor, and a professor at Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, where he created the course Design History of Comics and Animation. He also lectures on comics and design at a variety of schools, conferences, and other venues around Southern California. Michael's a print magazine contributing editor and has been writing features, essays, and reviews for nearly 40 years. His books include The Education of a Comics Artist. Please join me in giving them a huge welcome.
Okay, and thank you. How's that? This is good? Okay, so yeah, some of you I see are about my age. So some of you, if you were living here in LA in the late 60s and 1970s, then the name Charles Chaplin will be familiar to you because I see heads nodding. Okay, yeah, Charles was the preeminent movie critic at the Times back then. And important, well, you know, it is the hometown newspaper of Hollywood. And he would be writing these wonderful reviews that were very reader-friendly and very smart as well. And he went on to do TV as well, doing interviews with directors and actors. And you could see when he would talk, he was always had a real passion to know what was going on, a really genuine interest in what was happening. And it was a delight to hear him bring out people. So why am I going into this is, okay, for the next hour, you're going to be hearing about nothing but New York from this guy. So I figure I need to establish some LA cred for him. And so in order to do that, I would like yet another very quick intro to be given by one of Charles's daughters, who was born and raised in LA, and a writer and editor and a co-author with Stan of some of his books. And oh yes, also his wife, Susan Chapman. What's happening? Say a word or two? No. Okay, so let's just take it let's just jump right into this thing. What the heck is going on our screen? What's behind the door?
Yeah, so I threw that up there just because it's a classic joke, but a piano in a Atlantic comic strip, because what I did, essentially what he's doing, that's that character I drew of me, really, as a way for the reader to get into the comic strip, or kind of a Charlie Brown character. He didn't have a lot to say, and sort of bland, but it was a way. Anyway, so
yeah, we had a nose job since then, like you said.
You know, we all think we know what we look like. Not what you all think. That's my impression of myself. So this collection of the strips are a chronological view. First of all, it's impossible to grab there were so many of these things. I hear there's 275. I've heard up to 300. I haven't tried to count them. But to see them all in one place is really just... So I'm going to run through some of them, and Michael's going to jump in as he chooses.
Yeah, 300. Yeah, and I understand you have like 700 more under your bed. You haven't nobody's seen.
They were either in the bed, under the bed or in the closet. I didn't take super care of them, but enough of the originals died that we were able to put the scan them and put them together in this book.
Stay tuned for volume 2 and 3.
That would be nice. I'll call Gabby. So I suggested this idea to Milton Glaser. I had been an art director, I had been an illustrator. I thought, well, maybe I could get a little action creating my own stuff instead of always waiting for the phone to ring the way we illustrators always did. So I went to Milton, who was with Clay Felker, then had taken over the Village Voice. They were not Village people. They didn't survive very long. They got the hell out. But for a few minutes, they ran the Voice. And it was at that moment that I went in and said, what do you think about this? I walk around town, I sketch, I overhear people. I have a lot of newspaper experience. I kind of get it. And he said, yeah, that's fine, but, you know, comic strips are really circulation tools. Newspapers depend on that. Do it weekly, and let's do it. And I thought, one guy's going to go out into New York City and capture the city at a comic strip review. Seems unlikely, so I said yes. So Clay Felker said to me, Clay Felker, a really Upper East Side guy. I was living in the Village. He said, why don't you go to Bloomingdale's? I'm sure most of you know what that means. But I went, and I did my thing. I listened to people, I sketched them, put it together into a comic strip, went into the Voice. Now, I had to confront the editors themselves. This was not about Clay Felker and Milton Glaser. These are real Voice people. And I said, well, here it is. And they said, what is it? And I said, it's a thing where I listened to people and I wrote down what they said. It's like a comic strip. And they said, what are you kidding me? The comic strips are fiction. You're telling us this real? This is real? Real people said these things? We can't fact check it. How are we ever going to know such a thing? We have to name it something. Why don't we call it real life funnies? But you know, Jules Feifel could be real life funnies. That was as real as my stuff was, in a way. So they said, well, all right, so we'll call it, we guarantee it verbatim. All the dialogue. I didn't know what verbatim even meant. So then I said, and then one of the editors, of course, said, well, who's guaranteeing it? We're not guaranteeing it. We can't. But Stan Mack guaranteed it. They stuck my name right up front. And that's how this thing came about. And that was one panel from the Bloomingdale strip.
Right, and so you give credit to Milton Glaser, who he's the Dylan poster designer and I Heart New York symbol designer who needs no introduction.
Yeah.
But it was him that came up with the idea of, you know what builds circulation is continuity.
That's what he said, and so we jumped in and did that. The only time I ever went back to Bloomingdale's was when Darth Vader visited a few years later. What I love about that, well, this is a typical comic strip for those of you who are less familiar with them. One a week for 20 years. Darth had to take a lunch break. He goes back up the escalator in Bloomingdale's, and they ask him what he wants for lunch. I don't know if you and Mack could see this. He says, give me a tuna on white and a tab. It was, when I finished with the first Bloomingdale strip, I said, this is really boring. I mean, Bloomingdale. If I'm going to do this week after week, I've got to get out of my own comfort zone and go places I don't belong. To feel odd, where I have to work my way into it, make it an adventure. So that's why most of these comic strips are places I didn't get to until the time I decided to try to do this strip. And sometimes I was booted out, sometimes I wasn't. But this was the 70s. Right? Many of you will recognize the 70s. So it was easy in a way. Everybody was doing self-something. Vietnam was, we didn't change anything in the 60s. Nixon was on his way out. People turned inward, you might say. Self-exploration, or every different kind of counterculture idea was happening. All I had to do was drop into these places. And it was New York. So, as I said in the dedication, New Yorkers are like everybody else, only more so. I think you could probably say it's people in LA, but that would have been harder to do.
Well, when doing real life funnies in LA, even at that time, been impossible with the freeways. I mean, you couldn't wander around.
No. The thing about New York was, it was before cell phones, it was before screens of all kinds. People were talking to each other, and they were talking to each other in these unusual places, like collections of people who believed in and sometimes traveled with UFOs. Well, how could you resist that? So I went into them too.
Yeah, even these days, you feel you really couldn't do with these real life funnies in New York with everybody like this, and you're just hearing one end of some stupid conversation.
That would be the problem. I can't do it. I couldn't do it. I was all about paper and print and over here. Because every strip I did in this book was not my words, never my words. So it took a lot of interesting people to do that. For example, the early cable television. I did a lot of beer drinking back in the day because the two places I could usually count on, besides collections of UFO believers, was singles bars and a rap session. Remember rap session? In fact, quick story, rap session. It was a Unitarian church, and they ran rap sessions on various topics. One I heard about was called Singles Again. And rap session, people would sit around in a circle and reveal things about themselves in the hopes of making a contact with somebody else from the circle. Meet for tea and chocolate chip cookies afterwards, and that's where the action kind of took place. So I was going to go, and I told an illustrator friend of mine that I was going. He said, "Could I come along?" And I said, "Sure." So we get to the side door of the Unitarian Church, up the west side. And he says, "Okay, what do we do?" And I said, "Well, I go in there. I pretend to be a single again, and I take my notes very surreptitiously in a little pad, or on a napkin, or a shirt cuff, whatever I could get away with, and tell my story, a very boring version of the stories that everybody else was telling, because I didn't want the circle to stop for very long on me. So my friend says, "You're telling me you go in and lie?" Well, I thought of it more as method acting. I told him, in fact, that's kind of it. He said, "I can't do that anyway." I realized what I was doing was somewhere between voyeurism and genuine reporting. So that's kind of the basis of it.
Yeah, well, and part of that Irwin coming, I mean, just to go back quickly through your bio there, graduate Richie, come to New York, get hired by the Trib, and after that the LA Times, the New York Times, where you were doing illustrations and you were illustrating, you art directing other illustrators, basically giving them assignments which included having them go out and cover events. So it was kind of like an early version of what you eventually went, like you would assign Alan Cover to go and...
I did. I sent him to bus riots in Boston, and once just in time in the theater district to do a cover for the magazine. Yeah. But you nail it, and I know you told me that I thought I invented something in the sense that there were no role models for what I was doing, so I was just winging it all the time. But you said Harvey Kurtzman.
Oh,
before that, would do.
Yeah, he picked up at Help magazine and the 5 years of Help magazine in the early 1960s. Yeah, he was assigning all sorts of people like that. But I
thinking the same way, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, he was doing them himself, and you actually did at least one or two assignments. You self-assigned.
Well, I went out with order at the time. The illustrator pieces, and ended up sketching and writing down some stuff. At which point she said, "I'm the one supposed to be doing it." But I had enough experience to be able to go to the building and say, "What do you think of this idea?" That's true, and we jumped in. You could also say, "Well, I may have been doing something that you could look back in the history of cartooning to the early part of the last century and find variations of Harriman." There were people from those days who were sent out by the editors to cover events before they created these characters. But you could also possibly say, maybe you can tell me, the later strips I did were very wordy, and I had turned from overhearing to interviewing. And in a way, I was beginning to think that looking back, I mean, that was I in some way anticipating the current movement towards graphic books?
I think
Because
so.
there was
It
a
definitely influenced me.
Oh, there we go. All right. Just testimony of
He was
that.
down there.
Yeah.
Still was all recited.
Yeah, watching it.
Well, later Clay sent me out, when he had that stupid East Side Express, he sent me out to events to cover.
Mimi Pond, by the way.
Who thankfully is here despite the giant deadline.
Oh, yeah, finishing up another one.
So what I was doing, now, yes, it was a comic strip, but I didn't always conform to the single panel, the multiple panel idea. In this case, this is sheet metal in Central Park.
Yeah.
And it's just a classic example of the sorts of things that you could hear. People have said to me, you should have been where I was last night. And I thought, well, you could have written it down as well as I did. But this was an example of going for one giant picture. There was no way of breaking down, no point in breaking down sheet metal into one, a collection of individual panels.
But, but still you encapsulate, I mean, in addition to the dialogue, you know what really fucks up society. You just looking at the backgrounds there, it's like, you were definitely there. You were taking notes of the architecture. That's you'll see that motif occurring so much, just about always to set the scene, because you basically all of New York was your canvas.
It wasn't. I made sure that I tried as hard as I could to make sure that the people in the strips and the background of the strips were together. In other words, sometimes I would overhear something and I didn't have an opportunity to sketch at the moment. But I'd go back and make sure that as much as possible, the people I was sketching looked the same as the one who had given I overheard in the first place. But I liked drawing crazy. I loved life drawing. Loved it at school, taught it for a while.
You taught it,
Yeah. So the early strips, especially, were me just having a good time drawing my heart out.
Yeah, my drawing figure drawing. As you can see from the cover, he really enjoys figure drawing.
It wasn't always easy, and there were still remnants of the 60s going on in the 70s. There were protest movements, either anti-nuke or anti-Wall Street. This was one of those. The horse and the policeman kind of bouncing me out of the way as it happened. But that's classic 70s politics. Don't be a whore for money, take the day off. Some had to take your welfare. It wasn't New Yorker humor, but it was life. This is the rap session I was describing. I was in there someplace. My former wife was an Episcopalian who wanted to be a Jewish princess. There were things I wrote down, I can't tell you why, and things I didn't write down, and I don't know why that either, because I knew I had some talent for drawing, and I could do layouts. I didn't know where this idea of knowing which words to write down came from. Genetics, maybe.
Yeah, and how revolutionary this was. I mean, we have the Village Voice starting up in 1958, and they ran Jules's strip in the format that you've adapted to. His two-tier strips, and that was pretty much it. That was, nothing else in the Village Voice, no comic strips, and then you came along.
For all the reputation of the Jules had in the early voice, the editors weren't all that great about supporting comics. I think they were a little bit afraid of him. I mean, I never had an editor. I could have, Susan, my wife, might have been very helpful because she was a terrific editor. Or maybe not. But the voice editors kind of left the scripts alone. Mark Stanley is another one. He just went with it.
And Ben Catcher.
Ben Catcher, they let Ben Catcher go. I don't understand why. I never understood that. But I hit and run. I threw on my strips in my apartment, a drawing board. I only delivered every Monday night. The deadline was deadly. And everything else fit into that. Whatever drawing style I have here, it's the result of the deadline looming. Because it was always Monday night, and Monday was collecting all the stuff that I pulled together during the week and somehow pulled together, slapped down on. It felt a little bit like I was making a pizza, actually. Putting all these different elements down, and having to get it to the printer while it was still hot. And I lived in West Village. The Voice was in Santa Barbara Village, and I was just getting over there every Monday night.
And you had a backup folder for when you could.
I did. I told that. Sometimes the stories did not work. I had my standards, and sometimes they didn't work out. But I had a folder, remnants basically, and I would collect odds and ends and put them in the folder. And when the story, but they really became stories after a while. When the story wasn't working, I could turn to the remnants folders and pull together a collection, which is where that kind of paper.
Yeah, and you could also see what you were just mentioning before about kind of the predecessor of graphic novels. As your stories got longer, you just became more interested in going more in depth. And so, okay, read it for that, but also a warning for all of you. I'm hoping all of you are going to pick up a copy. The one warning is, don't try sitting down and reading it all in one sitting. Okay, but when you do keep going back, you will see the progression, and it's just beautiful to watch. Yeah.
There are 11 chapters, and I have a little intro before each one, because as I evolved, the city too. The 80s was a lot different than the 70s in so many ways. I had a lot of fun with sex in the 70s, Plato's Retreat, and stuff like that. The Pink Pussycat Boutique, but that was totally inappropriate for the 80s, and everything changed. Except that the yuppies all erupt. This is in a way a history of the boomer generation, I think. Well, when the younger brothers and sisters of the 70s boomers hit New York, they came with MBAs. They were more interested in money than a lot of things that went on in the 70s. So the yuppies, which was coined around 82 or so, I did 2 giant posters that sit sideways on the book.
Yeah, we're heading for those. Huh?
Delineating exactly. Sorry?
We're heading for those.
Oh, we're heading, I'm sorry.
Well, I know that.
But I can't resist this. If you were a baby in a womb and someone inserted something in there, of course you'd say there's a UFO.
Yeah. New York, you're never at a loss for material.
And here's another example of, I was never at a loss for material. Remember balloonograms or grams of all different kinds, gorillograms in this case. She was hustling her own business, and I went along with her. And she said, God, I've got to make $1 million from this. Although, should we take, there's this her assistant, I never saw him without his husband. Should we take the banana and white rain? I never could figure out what one thing had to do with the other. Cocaine was a big deal down on Wall Street in those days.
Oh, the 70s.
There were some venues I couldn't do much with. Rock concerts. This was the Plasmatics at CBGB. I mean, I couldn't hear. I did go backstage with the Plasmatics, though. A lot of the conversation there revolved around where you could find ultra large stockings, women's stockings.
Well, that's one of the amazing things that I find in going through these things about how, well, just the one that you show where it's like, where do you follow Darth Vader at Bloomingdale's? You follow him when he's taking his coffee break. You know, it's rather than, here's Darth Vader.
These are little, I like to think of these as the little, if you're looking at history, this is history from absolutely the cement upwards. They're little stories. Mm-hmm. If there was a lot going on up above, the economy of the 70s was in the toilet, you'd have to get it from having some conversations with homeless people who themselves might not have always been homeless. Some of them were drug addled, but there were a lot who were there because they had no choice at that moment.
Yeah, just quickly, you did a whole, you went to a Billy Joel concert, and you spent the entire strip talking, showing your time back in the sound booth.
In the sound booth with the directors.
Yeah.
I wasn't
didn't even get out.
Stage.
Yeah, didn't even get out to the audience.
In time, I did end up with a press pass and a bit of reputation so that I could go with the police or other kinds of organized places which the average pedestrian could never get into. In this case, I spent an evening wandering around with a patrolman. But it was funny to be able to pick up backstage jargon, like this sort of comic racism.
Oh yeah, that's powerful. Yeah, this particular strip.
But nobody really, I got into trouble, but not because people got angry. I wasn't a satirist. I was an ironist you might say, or with a lighter touch. And so a lot of people like being in them. I would get letters, you know, that years later, still, you know, that guy with the beard in the third panel in the bottom, yeah, that was me. Stuff like that.
Just with that one, I was thinking how it turned out to be very tragic. But there was also these little things. Like I remember in that particular strip, as you're reading it, you're getting out of the police car, and the policeman tells you,
Right.
don't forget to lock the car because there's a lot of car thefts around here. It's
People
brilliant.
often would say, that didn't really happen, did it?
Oh, my
So
God.
I was making this stuff. I just simply got on a city bus one day, and I'm hearing two voices from the back of the bus. And I simply, like in a film, I worked my way back, sketching the people, until I got to the back and discovered that both voices, taking very different political perspectives,
Yeah.
was the same woman. Really, I couldn't make that stuff.
Yeah, and starting out at the Trib in the Times, you knew lettering typography, right?
Well,
You were able to
yeah.
express the different voices.
Right. That's part of the art director's job.
Sure.
And you can't leave sex out. I couldn't leave sex out. It was all over the place, it seemed to me. This is the Pink Pussycat Boutique on Christopher Street. And you see the sexy broad on the right there. By the way, this was when sex was coming out of the dark corners. And this was a well-lit place. Sex in the 70s, they come out of the shadows itself, and people were buying sex toys for the first time. Anyway, so that woman, I ended up demonstrating behind the counter at one point. A little dildo with a crank in the back. Anyway, this is the way I drew it. Years and years later, I got a note from a guy who described himself as an old bloke in a tweed cap from London. He said, that was me. And it was your strip and some other things like that in those days that eventually gave me strength to transition. And he now is a successful PR guy in England.
Use of furniture.
And Plato's Retreat. It had a big reputation, so he made it. It's a sex place in the Sonia Hotel on the Upper West Side.
And there's Stan in his press cap.
I went there.
It's a funny drawing when you see the first panel.
I was
drew
wearing a
himself.
hat that said press.
Yeah, and it came like halfway down your face. Anyway, go ahead.
I don't swear all the pictures. Swear that all the pictures are true. The way I draw them.
Not drawn verbatim. Okay.
Right. But what to do once there? So quick, referring back to something you said a few minutes ago. I'm walking around. People were having sex all over the place in various ways. There was one called the pizza room. And I bump into a guy, because it's very dim. I turned around, it's Harvey Kurtzman. Harvey Kurtzman is there researching, he claimed, Little Annie Fanny, this man in Playboy magazine. Probably true. But what do? I didn't want to make fun. I mean, I never tried to make fun of people. I wanted to find out what they believe and put it down. So what to do was a storyline. It turns out that there was a legal swimming pool there, and therefore it had to have a legal lifeguard licensed by the state. So I found the lifeguard, and he and I are at this was the shallow end, what was going on here. He said, it's an easy job for me because nobody's down here. There's no problems here. It's all going on to shallow end. Like that. I did get in trouble from time to time. Macy's, every Christmas season, would hire elves to, I don't know why she doesn't have a nose, by the way.
I was just going to ask.
I just left it up. So they hire elves to hang out and help with the shoppers around the Santas. So I tried out as an elf and did a strip based on my experiences going through the training. Well, Macy's went nuts. I didn't think anything of it, but their business department, called the business department of The Voice, who called David Schneiderman was then the editor of Village Voice. But, the Village Voice had serious problems on closing night because their reporters were always being sued by politicians all around town. So they had serious problems. Every Monday night, the lawyers officially gathered at closing time. So the idea of me fooling around with the elves in Macy's wasn't really going to get David Schneider very excited. But so he said, go easy, but I don't know.
That was the only heat you got from at the time of The Voice, right?
I'm sorry?
That was the only real heat that you got from the
From
time of The Voice.
Yeah, no, right, I did. There were some real characters in the village in those days. One was the rug maid,
Oh,
who simply wrapped himself in a rug remnant and lay down on a public pavement to be stepped on by people who didn't know there was somebody in there. And he would get off on it. So he had some psychological, he was a nice guy otherwise, but he had these psychological. He became well known. I did 3 strips on him. He became well known enough that people would hire him to lie at the entrance to their club, for example, downtown club, so that they'd have to step over him on the way in. He did not like it if people discovered him. That did not work that way at all. I saw him once at a bar, where he was behind the bar. So the bartenders were running back and forth on him. He had an idea once, I don't know if he ever followed through with it, it was the era of the Jane Fonda workout tapes. And he said, I'm going to do a step tape. Workout tape, and I'll be the step. I don't know whether that ever happened. For those who might know him, and he brags about my caricature of him, so it's safe to say, this is Ron Hauge. Ron Hauge was a poor, struggling cartoonist on Avenue B and 13th Street for a long time, and we were good friends. And he was mugged, just half the mugging. But, Ron is saying to these guys, you came to the wrong side of town, basically. And they ended up sharing Ron's cigarette, and that was the end of the mugging. It didn't get very far. But he loved this caricature of me. He was, he came out here and did very well on The Simpsons.
really?
And before that, Seinfeld. So he did fine. And he was caricatured from a number of different artists we would know. But he said that I did the best job of all. Oh, this was the beginning of the 80s, and I did a male and female yuppie. I have one here where you can see a portion of it.
Yeah. Well, the one lying down, which is the way it is in the book, I think, just stretched out like that, not lying down, but it is like a taking off the sarcophagus. You do an archaeological dig from the 1970s, and you open up the coffin, and there's this yuppie male and female, lying there with all these things. It's like, why don't they buy Japanese products? I mean, it's just got all these, all the things you have up here. This is
very accurate.
Yeah, and it's got archaeological value. Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah. It's a great read.
And the women, the female was the same, had the same kind of details. An idea for the changes in attitude from the 70s to the 80s. Feminists Make Me Sick is my lead to this story. Women's Live as a Crock, I got a C in feminism from my lesbian teacher in college. Pick up a goddamn Wall Street Journal. The philosophy of life was. So I was developing a habit of introducing the reader to where they were this week, because they were someplace different every single week. So the character of me was a way to be kind of awestruck by what was going on, and a way for entry for the reader to get into the story, and at the back end, leaving you, the reader, feeling relatively comfortable that you had gotten the story, leaving you without a bunch of questions, and preparing you for wherever I went next week.
Yeah, you even show how you were reacting in the last panel. Well, you do that in a couple of panels where you just walk in and holy crap. Where was this, by the way? Where she was founding all this?
She was in the village. She lived in the village. I came across people all the time, because one person would suggest another person, or I would bump into somebody in the street. I was much braver as a cartoonist at Real Life Funnies than I ever had been in real life. But it was amazing when you put that cloak on. You can go out and accost people. And somewhere in here, I met that woman.
Oh.
Biceps and the new breasts. Well, a lot of the women athletes of today owe their ability to get training to this generation of women. I think we're the first ones who seriously were, first of all, they were the first of the boomers to go directly into the marketplace rather than leaving the little kid at home and going back to try to take advantage of the college degree sheet they had. So these women went directly into the gym for the first time.
Are you the bozo in this strip, Sam?
Bob Giraldi was doing, you remember music videos from the 70s and 80s? Bob Giraldi had been a very well-known director, been hired by Lionel Richie to do actually was out here, do a music video in some hangar out here someplace, a giant space. And they lacked one Latin dancer. So Bob Giraldi asked me if I would dress up and do it. And they started this music, and Lionel came out, did his thing.
You look dapper, actually.
But I looked great, except that I didn't have the hat on the right angle, he pointed out, and I ended up being called a bozo by him. And they took the son of the priest, the guy playing the priest, to take my place. And so that was but that was one of the few strips where I was purely the punchline. That's right. Circle that tape. But there are a bunch of media strips in here because I was doing a comic strip from 81 to 91 for Adweek magazine. Some of you may know that. It's important, much like The Voice, an important ad magazine. So I was covering media a lot. There are a number of strips in here. Well, this is a little different. Coke. This guy is appreciating Coke the way people appreciate a good wine. And the whole strip is just him coming, rolling, putting the Coke in a probably $100 bill. On the other side of the spectrum was crack. And I spent a lot of time among the squatters of the East Village in the late 80s. We may get to that.
You were pacing.
Well, speaking of that. I got very friendly with some of the anarchists. A lot of people there were fighting for, homeless was a big problem over there, and a lot of agitators, advocates pushing for housing, low-income housing for them. And all of a sudden, landlords were leaving, abandoning buildings which they could no longer support and make profit from, leaving them to the city, who didn't know what to do with them, except they knew that if they hung on long enough, the real estate people were going to descend. Anyway, one of the couples I became quite friendly with, squatters, was Rex and Rosemary Walls. Rex especially. This is a portrait of a day I spent with him. Rex, a tough old bird. Unlike a lot of the squatters who were younger, Rex and Rosemary came from the West and from the South. Very different. They were Westerners, very well educated, but also kind of crazy. He was probably a alcoholic as well, but also a gentleman. And a terrific guy. I was there one day when he backed down a bunch of drug dealers who wanted to take over that building and turn it into a drug supermarket. And he was not. If he had they were pulling guns. It didn't matter. He was going to stand up to them. So I did this strip. And most of what he said was bragging or irrelevant. But one of the things he said was, you know, my daughter is the gossip columnist for New York Magazine. And I said, yeah, right, Rex. But being a good Senate reporter, I called up New York Magazine and asked for Jeanette Walls. I knew her name. She thought I was promoting myself, as most people do who call up gossip columnists. I said, there's a guy over here, a squatter, who claims to be your father. And there's this, really a gasp at the other end. Turned out it was absolutely true, and she was hiding it for those years. Because she was traveling in very fancy circles, and her folks were eating out of garbage cans. But it was this moment when she began to think that she couldn't keep it a secret any longer. And it was our conversation. She said, do me one favor. You don't have to, but I wish you would. Fictionalize the magazine I work for and the women's college I graduated from, which I did because I didn't run a gossip. But she was very appreciative. And we kept in touch after that. She wrote the afterword to this book because she never forgot that I did that. She really was thankful, and she's a wonderful woman. So she turned around and wrote The Glass Castle, a huge bestseller. Some of you know about it. And in fact, when it was made into a movie, she took this strip and gave it to Woody Harrelson, who was going to be playing her father, and said, that's as good an example of him as I have.
Wow.
Yep. Just before you go, real quickly, kind of a tangent of sorts. The balloon in the upper right corner. I want to ask you a little bit about your lettering, whether you letter things out and occasionally run into situations where you have to bust through the second wall or something to get the word in there.
Well, cartoonists, I guess some cartoonists do that all the time. But I was doing this whole thing like a pizza, and everything had to come together very quickly to be delivered on time. Nitty gritty dirt band usually in the background. I drew standing up. The whole thing was action driven. And if it got a little dirt running across Cougar Square to deliver, that was fine too, because this thing was going to end, in my view, I come from newspapers. In my view, this thing was going to end up in effect on the birdcage floor.
Yeah. Well, I saw the word hide going into hiding, and I just went places that I didn't think you meant. But anyway, go ahead.
That was part of the fun.
Yeah.
This is a classic kind of picture of Rex, who has since passed away. I'm not sure about her mother, but she was living with Jeanette down south in recent years. I have another story. I hope I'm not taking up too much time with these, but I was walking along. Bobby Fuller was a friend, advocate, serious lefty, running the Hobo Theater Company in a loft in the East Village, and the actors were all homeless people. So we became friends. So he and I are walking along across the park one day when the cops were ousting the homeless. They did it on a regular basis. And a bunch of young protesters were running by us, and Bobby said, where are you going? They said, we're going to take over this abandoned building and hang signs out front attacking the police, attacking the mayor. Bobby said, can we come along? They said, of course. So while I'm not in this comic, I was right next to him the whole way. There was a kind of a strap he had around his chest. I'll tell you what that was about in a minute. But we ran up with the guys. They barricaded themselves on the second or third floor. They're hanging the banners out front. The cops spot them, come running over, and they barricaded themselves in. The cops were saying, we're going to break down the damn door, and you're under arrest. And Bobby said, I can't be arrested. I said, well, it's not going to do my story any good either. So we jumped out a back window, clambered down, jumped off a garage roof, which was on Avenue B, right around the corner from 10th Street, where the building was. And Bobby runs to the phone booth at the corner. Remember phone booths? And so I have a picture of us jumping out. There was the two of us going out because he couldn't afford to be arrested. So he gets to the phone booth. He calls up his wife, Mary Beth, and says, Mary Beth, I couldn't get arrested because he has a 2-month-old baby called, in this strip I called Emma, whose real name was Chea, after Che Guevara, giving you an idea of the politics of the
How left are we going here, right?
And he says, we could have been, she took over her first building, but I couldn't be arrested because we just didn't have enough formula. He had a bottle. So that's only the first part of the story. Quickly, the second half is that I lost track. Bobby died quite young of bone cancer. And Chea and Mary Beth disappeared. I lost track. I've always wondered what happened to Chea. I only knew her a little bit longer than this. During COVID, exactly 30 years minus 2 months, I got a phone call from a tattoo artist in Austin, Texas.
Wow.
Who says, I'm having a surprise birthday party for my wife, 30th birthday party for my wife, Chea. It was that woman with 2 little kids. And we had a Zoom surprise party in which she said to me, I never knew my father, but my mother collected your comic strips about him, and that was my family album.
Wow.
I couldn't beat that stuff.
Yeah, and we want time for Q&A, so.
Yeah.
Were you homeless and in the theater booth, and you were one of the people who tried to take over that brother?
Was I homeless?
And in the theater booth?
No. I hung out in the theater group, but
So
I
you
wasn't
know
one of the
that?
actors
Okay.
at all. They came from either the park or hostels or places where they were living. They would show. One guy became quite friendly with, who was a crack addict. We'd come down from Bronx to participate in the play they were working on called Gogol's Lower Depths play, which was perfect. He said he had to keep coming down through the middles of blocks because the drug dealers were at the corners, and he had to make sure. Because if he went by a corner, he was in trouble.
Right. So to go to Q&A, did you have one? Like, one more to?
No, Shades of Harvey Weinstein. I couldn't resist this. I wasn't there. I knew this woman quite well. I said, okay, if you let me grill you and get every word right, I want to do that because I cannot resist it. It was exactly what happened. She was meeting with she ran a nonprofit. It's called the Children's Foundation. And he was one of her funders. So she was just having a drink with him. And then she came back in the kitchen with 2 glasses of wine. That's what she thought. She told me,
This was it. Yeah.
we're getting close.
We need to go to Q&A. So
This guy turned out to be, he was a homeless guy on West 4th Street and 6th Avenue subway entrance. His name was Piero Helitzer. It turned out that he is a really famous poet, experimental poet, and experimental 8mm inventive filmmaker, part of the Andy Warhol crowd. But he also was schizophrenic, and he spent time on the street. And one of the now famous friends with his sister and daughter, who has created a film called The Invisible Father, which you can find online. I guess we should stop.
let's see. So anyone want to start? The person dropping things over there? Do you have anything you want to add? Besides noise?
Please ask a question, or we'll just have to keep going.
Yeah, Janet.
When did you, are you still in New York? Or did
Yes.
He's here, just in
Yeah, jet lag right now.
Dad is a little younger, and do you feel like it just is the most interesting city there is? Is that, or are you just
Well, the
staying
70s
where you
and
are?
80s, I think one of the reasons, maybe the most important reason, people have said, well, why now? Why this book now? And I've noticed online, there's a affection and interest for this era. I mean, for New York in general, there always has been, how the Brooklyn Bridge was built and all that. But there's something about the 70s and 80s that does seem to have, at least it seems online, as though there are all kinds of fan clubs for this period. So that was one of the reasons I thought, well, maybe it's time. My wife Susan said, by the way, it's the 50th anniversary. And I thought, well, I'm not crazy about the word anniversary, but 50 years I did that. So, yes, Steve.
Those were very heady days, and you captured them in this book. So my question really is, what do you do now? How do you take that, your creative time? How do you take that energy? Do you still enjoy that kind of heady feeling? Do you exercise that craft?
Well, sure, exercise and craft. I still love to draw. I don't have anywhere near that kind of energy. And the city's not only not the same, but I'm not the same. How you would do that today is not my problem. That would be people of that age, when I was that age, and figure out how to deal with the screens, all these screens. But no, I'm still
doing work with it.
Yeah, and there are other books. Your books with Susan and
Yeah, we've done a couple of graphic novels, historical graphic novels for young people, one on the Civil War and the other on the American Revolution.
Yeah, we're checking those.
Anything else?
And also just another hand over there.
Yes.
You touched on, what you did then and what you can do now. I've noticed, and I'm actually a friend of Susan County High School, the conversations in the streets are probably very different in the sense that so many people are plugged into their headphones and people aren't talking to one another in the streets as often. On the subway, on the buses and taxis or whatever it is, or airports, wherever you were getting your source material. I would think it would be a very different kind of energy that you would have to draw from. Just not that you're necessarily doing it now, but do you ever imagine like, oh, this would be much harder because the conversations aren't, in my mind, as rich as they used to be?
I would do a version of Real Life Funnies. I have tried it a few times. I've done one for an online news magazine, but I'm different. They tend to be a little bit more political. I talk to young people whenever I get a chance. Young people meaning late 20s.
That's here with me too.
And wonder how they would deal with this humor. This is crazy humor. And there's some hot stuff in there. There's some stuff I didn't include, but there's some hot stuff in there. What would they make of it? Would they even be interested in it? And what would they say? Would they think it was funny or horrifying? As wild as things are today, they are in many ways, what would they do given this assignment? And who would give them this assignment? It would have to be an online thing in the first place. So it would have to be done some digital version. It's a very complicated question.
Yeah, sorry.
It's also the way he got into it. When he's got people in the daily newspaper racket like Jimmy Breslin. You were the cartoon part of a kind of a new journalism wave that was going on. Yeah, and so because so much of your reporting is incredibly innovative. The graphic journalism that you were doing, it was groundbreaking.
Well,
and maybe you want to speak a bit about your writer influences.
Well, they were just what you said: Jimmy Breslin, and Tom Wolfe, and Gloria Steinem, and a number Pete Hamill, though he wasn't at the trip. All these people were practicing they came to be called the New Journal. Tom Wolfe, the New Journalism, and I was reading every one of them in order to come up with a way to illustrate the piece for the book review or whatever I was working on at the trip, and I think it just seeped into my bones. I became a newspaper person. It was certainly not anything I could have imagined back home, starting out at RISD. Never heard of such a thing as a cartoon course, for example. I'm sure it's there now.
What did you study at RISD?
Well, I was an illustration major, probably more interested in painting, more interested in de Kooning than comic strips. I read comics as a kid, but it never occurred to me. Did it you? I don't know.
No, I always wanted to do comics because I was raised. My father put the Signet paperback Mad from early EC Mad in my hot little hands when I was
Valentine.
as soon as I could read Valentine, and I was never the same.
Yeah, I'm sorry. if only he didn't do that. I have two sons, one of whom was a game designer, and I did a strip, which is in the book. Before there were computer games, there were very intricate role-playing games that only kids with a certain kind of brain could handle.
They're huge now.
Huge.
Now.
And I was there at the beginning, as it turned out, by chance. And so they gave me, I did a comic strip on a night. The game designers would hire high school kids to come in and test the games for free. They loved it. So they gave me a couple of games, which I brought home to my 8-9-year-old son, and he never recovered. If only I had done it. He's done nothing but design games ever since. That is a problem. Yes.
Yeah, kind of along the lines of what you were saying earlier too, is the conversations of today. Do you find that they would be, or they are, as you hear them on the streets, more in the phones or the earbuds are in, and so they're more one-sided? Are you hearing the same kinds of things or are very different?
Well, you make an interesting point. Somebody asked me about this the other day. When you show the other side of a conversation on the phone, how did you hear that if you weren't the one listening? But the rest of your question is, I have no idea how I would do it today. I don't hear the same things. I'm not looking for the same.
You don't hear the same. You don't necessarily hear a lot of the same things if you do.
I'm not looking.
And you wouldn't have to. You wouldn't have to necessarily hear the other side. You could just do. Sometimes it's just that strange one comment, that somebody's making, and it doesn't have to be a part of a conversation. But the fact that really nobody else, for the listener, is on the other side of that conversation.
I'm looking for the book.
Okay, yeah.
The back cover of this book is a cartoon in which two women are walking down the street. There's a phone booth and there's a word "thorn" coming from the phone booth, and they're saying, "We got to tell Stan Mack about this." People did tell me stories, but the background to this story is
the phone rang and they just
they were right there, and the phone rang, and the woman answered it. And she said, he said, "Is this such and such a number?" And she said, "Well, yes, it is." And he said, "Is this so-and-so? I'm answering an ad for a male slave for 3 dominatrixes." And she said, "Well, no, it isn't." He said, that's when he said, "Darn." He'd seen an ad in the back of the bulletin board at the back of the Voice. And it had ads like that all the time. So I did the
Hence
back.
the comment, yeah. I've got to tell Stan Mack that, yeah.
Right, so she was able to tell me the other side of that conversation.
That's great.
Can I ask a question about that box that Bob brought? Maybe you can bring it up here. Tell the story on it. Yeah, just.
Okay, good.
This is a little bit of Stan Mack history here.
Yeah, we were.
Bob Kurtz, by the way.
Okay.
Kurtz and Associates. Kurtz and Friends.
Most of you will know. I do animated films, and before I had my company, I worked with a very young guy who says, "I didn't realize it, but this may be your first job."
Real close to the first one ever.
Yeah. So what happened was Lipton Soup made a special tea, and it's called Giggle Noodle Soup, and it was the Soup Man, and he did. This is the box.
Wow.
And with drawings on the back, cross hatching, it wouldn't stop, which my animators complained about. The film is great.
Nobody called me to do those sketches, by the way, in your company.
We mean
All the anime, I'm joking. But all the animators.
You did the layouts.
What I did was, I had a
You
brilliant.
did. I would draw rough the drawing for you. You did the layouts on on animation paper, which were gorgeous, and you did them in ink.
I don't remember. I swear I don't remember. My story is exactly. It's about that character, but it's a different story.
Okay.
I had a brilliant agent. For 15 minutes, she went on to be much more important. I became a very important anthropologist, museum director. But for a while, she was my agent when I just started out. And she would take my drawings around, and she got. Now, I don't know, because this was in New York. The
And
assignment
I'm in
was.
LA all the time, so we did the film in LA, and you and I talked back and forth. I think on the phone. We may have met, but he says he never met me.
Well, my memory only goes far. I have a terrible memory. If I didn't write it down immediately, it was gone.
Well, memory's not guaranteed verbatim.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And you know what? I bet Skylight would like to sell some books, and you'd like to do some autographing. Maybe one more question. Anybody else have a rap?
But I haven't seen that in 100 years. That,
100 years?
That's
revealing your age.
But that's okay. It's, what?
What do you say? I have my back. Are you talking about me?
Well, you can't mess with people from LA. One more question? If any?
No, that's it. Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you. Stand up, ladies and gentlemen. Here's New York, go for you.